On January 31st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie finished dinner at her daughter Annie's home in Tucson, Arizona. The evening was ordinary. They shared a meal, laughed over a board game, and said their goodnights just before 10. At 9:48 p.m., her son-in-law drove her back to her house in the quiet Catalina foothills. By 9:50, the garage door rolled shut behind her. That was the last confirmed moment anyone in her family saw her alive. Nancy was 84 years old. She lived alone. She relied on a pacemaker and daily medication to manage serious health conditions. Yet, according to the Pima County Sheriff's Office, she was mentally sharp and fully independent. She had spent more than 50 years in the Tucson area after relocating with her family in the early 1970s. Decades earlier, she lost her husband, Charles, who died in 1988 during a mining trip in Mexico. After that, she raised 3 children on her own, including her daughter Savannah, who would later become a nationally recognized co-host on NBC's Today. Nancy was not known to disappear. She had routines. She kept appointments. She answered her phone. But sometime after midnight on February 1st, something unfolded inside her home on Camino Escalante. What investigators later uncovered would suggest planning, patience, and precision. At 1:47 a.m., her Nest doorbell camera went offline. 25 minutes later, at 2:12 a.m., another camera on the property registered motion consistent with a person. Because there was no active cloud subscription, the footage was automatically overwritten. At 2:28 a.m., the monitoring app connected to her pacemaker lost contact with her phone. 41 minutes. From the first digital blackout to the final medical disconnect, whatever happened occurred within that narrow stretch of silence. The next morning, Nancy did not log into her weekly virtual church gathering. She never missed it. When calls to her phone went straight to voicemail, concern turned into alarm. Friends contacted her family. By late morning, relatives drove to her home in the Catalina foothills. At 11:56 a.m., they arrived. At 12:03 p.m., after receiving no response at the door, they called 911. Deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department reached the house shortly after 12:15 p.m. What began as a welfare check quickly shifted into something far more serious. Near the front entrance, investigators located blood. It was not a small amount. It was enough to suggest violence. Later forensic analysis confirmed the blood belonged to Nancy. Inside the home, subtle but significant disturbances told a story of interruption. Items were out of place. There were indications that she had been confronted and removed. There was no sign that she had left voluntarily. Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed reporters within hours. He stated that early evidence pointed toward a targeted abduction rather than a random burglary. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the case almost immediately. Within days, hundreds of agents and local deputies were assigned, canvassing neighborhoods, reviewing surveillance footage, and tracing every possible lead across southern Arizona. Then, on February 10th, a major development occurred. FBI Director Kash Patel released 4 still images recovered from Nancy's Nest doorbell system. The device itself was missing, and because there was no cloud subscription, the footage was believed to be permanently lost. However, working with Google engineers, federal technicians managed to extract fragments of residual data from back-end servers. The images were stark and grainy. They showed a lone figure approaching the front door in the early morning darkness. The individual wore a ski mask, long sleeves, gloves, and carried a backpack. A firearm appeared secured in an unusual holster positioned between the legs. In one frame, the figure reached toward the camera. In another, foliage from a nearby plant was lifted and placed in front of the lens. It was a deliberate attempt to obscure visibility before entry. The FBI described the suspect as male, approximately 5'9" to 5'10", with an average build. A dark mustache seemed visible beneath the mask. Investigators noted what looked like a ring imprint beneath one glove. Authorities distributed images of the distinctive holster to regional firearms retailers, hoping someone might recognize the design or recall a sale. Identifying a masked figure from infrared stills is difficult. Proving identity requires physical evidence. That evidence soon emerged in the form of DNA. Crime scene technicians conducted a meticulous sweep of the residence. Beyond Nancy's blood, they recovered additional biological material that did not belong to her. The sample did not match family members or known associates. It was unknown. Days later, approximately 2 miles from the home along a roadside field, investigators discovered a pair of discarded black gloves. The gloves visually resembled those worn by the masked figure in the doorbell images. The gloves were rushed to a private forensic laboratory. Analysts extracted a male DNA profile. Now there were 2 unknown genetic samples. One from inside the residence, one from gloves found nearby. Both were submitted into CODIS, the combined DNA index system used nationwide to compare crime scene profiles with those of convicted offenders. Both searches returned no match. The individual who left that DNA had no qualifying record in the database, or at least none that had been entered. That absence forced investigators to consider a newer tool: investigative genetic genealogy. The technique gained international attention in 2018 when it identified Joseph James DeAngelo, the man known as the Golden State Killer. Detectives uploaded crime scene DNA into public genealogy databases and identified distant relatives. From there, family trees were constructed and narrowed until one name surfaced. The same method later helped identify Bryan Kohberger in the University of Idaho homicides. The process is complex. When CODIS fails, forensic genealogists upload the unknown DNA profile to public ancestry platforms where users voluntarily share genetic data. Even a distant cousin match can provide a starting point. Researchers then cross-reference census records, obituaries, marriage certificates, and geographic patterns. They build outward and then inward. They eliminate by age, location, and opportunity. Eventually, a shortlist emerges. C.C. Moore of Parabon Nanolabs publicly stated that cases like this are precisely what the technology was designed to solve. She indicated that if a viable profile exists, identification is often a matter of time. But there was a complication. Sheriff Nanos revealed that the DNA recovered from the home appeared to be a mixture. Mixed profiles are significantly more difficult to interpret. One forensic analyst estimated the sample could contain a high percentage of Nancy's DNA and only a small fraction from a potential suspect. Extracting a clean, usable profile from that mixture requires advanced laboratory work and patience. Officials cautioned that the genealogy process could take months. That is not unusual. The Golden State Killer investigation required extensive genealogical reconstruction before confirmation. Precision matters more than speed. While scientists worked inside laboratories, detectives continued building the case in the field. Investigators collected thousands of hours of surveillance video from surrounding neighborhoods and businesses. Every passing vehicle was cataloged. Every pedestrian reviewed. Digital forensics teams analyzed data from cell towers covering the Catalina foothills area. Even brief pings can establish presence. Even silence can be telling. Turning a phone off creates a gap in data that investigators scrutinize carefully. Experts have explained that these digital gaps can form patterns. In the Kohberger investigation, phone activity before and after the crime created a narrow blackout window that aligned with the timeline of the murders. Detectives in Nancy's case are examining similar possibilities. Meanwhile, the family continued to speak publicly. Savannah Guthrie stepped away from her duties at NBC to focus on the search. The Pima County Sheriff's Office formally cleared immediate family members as suspects. A reward of $1 million was announced for information leading to Nancy's safe recovery. Then came the ransom communications. Several media outlets reported receiving messages demanding payment in cryptocurrency in exchange for Nancy's return. One note allegedly referenced a personal detail that had not been publicly disclosed, raising questions about authenticity. Deadlines were set. Deadlines passed. Communication stopped. Authorities later arrested an individual accused of sending fraudulent ransom threats unrelated to the actual crime. The disruption complicated an already tense situation. Some analysts have questioned whether the abduction was premeditated or whether events escalated unexpectedly. Blood near the entrance suggests a rapid confrontation. Yet the suspect's apparent attempt to disable cameras indicates planning. Both possibilities remain under review. Sheriff Nanos has stated publicly that investigators believe Nancy could still be alive. He emphasized that progress is being made, though details remain confidential. Former federal agents have noted that in large investigations, the key clue often exists within collected data long before it is recognized. Weeks have passed. No arrest has been announced. No suspect named. But the DNA remains under analysis. Genealogists continue constructing family trees from distant matches. Digital evidence is still being parsed frame by frame. History shows that genetic genealogy has repeatedly turned anonymous DNA into a specific identity. If that pattern holds, the answer may already be embedded in the science. Waiting. Quiet. Until the right connection is made. If you're following this investigation and want updates as new details emerge, subscribe now. We'll continue tracking every significant development the moment it's confirmed.